a baby is born with a strangely mature consciousness, happily watched by his new mother. He opens his status panel and notices that he has returned to level 1 and also that he simply has no name at all. Beside the woman, a man addressed as Your Majesty approaches and compliments the child's eyes, which look like the mother's. She, in return, thinks the baby's mouth is identical to the father's. In front of a crowd of kneeling subjects, the king chooses the name of his son, Noah Ararat, who receives the title of 13th Imperial Prince. After seeing his status updated with his new title, Noah is shocked by the importance he seems to hold in this new life. The king asks a subordinate what the boy's aptitude is, and he answers that it is water. In that case, considering that Almeria is home to many members of the Water clan, His Majesty declares that this will be his son's fief. At the same moment, Noah notices that among the available elements in his status, a +S appears in the water attribute. The king asks Cruz to show what his son is capable of doing. Then Cruz begins an enchantment that develops Noah's water abilities to a new value, SS. Immediately, the people present are astonished to realize that Noah's power has already awakened on his very first day of life, an extremely rare occurrence that delights the subjects. After all, nothing is more incredible than being the king's son and being born with such an impressive talent. Noah Ararat was born in a kingdom whose capital is located on a plain surrounded by imposing mountains, known as the Country of Warriors, the Mills Empire. This country is living its golden age and has been attracting a remarkable flow of money and development. Noah, as the 13th biological son of the man who ruled these prosperous lands, was loved by the subjects for his talent and personality. 6 years after his reincarnation, the prince noticed that everyone sees his status as if his water attribute were SS, while only he sees it as SS, an addition made by his subordinates. For example, the S in water comes from the fief of Almeria, to which he belongs by his father's decision on the day of his birth. The rest comes from his maids. By the way, as he grew and gained more subordinates, the young noble discovered that his level can increase infinitely. Not only having this unexpected privilege, Noah was also seen by the maids as someone who, despite his young age when most kids of his generation prefer spending the day causing mischief, was personally calm, focused, and strangely mature, emanating an air of leadership that not even many adult nobles could convey. Even so, of course, there are still limits to what a 6-year-old child can do. One day, Noah was approached by Evelyn, a beautiful maid specialized in receiving visitors. She informs him that the 2nd and 4th princes have come to visit and that he should eat calmly so he can receive his brothers. Since the crown prince is among them, Noah feels slight pressure at having to meet such an important figure of the kingdom. But, as someone born to take on that kind of responsibility, he does not disappoint. After lunch, he bows to Albert Ararat, the 2nd prince and crown prince, as well as Henry Ararat, the 4th prince. Both praise their younger brother's impeccable manners and emphasize that he will possibly become an excellent prime minister in the future. When announcing that he brought a gift for Noah, Albert claps his hands so that a servant enters the room carrying a heavy box that emanates a brutally dark and striking energy. The man struggles so much under its weight that he almost drops it harder than he should. When ordered, the servant opens the box and is overwhelmed by a horrible vision of desperate screams, where men fear being devoured and beg Albert for help. In the middle of this vision, a sword appears, the same sword that is now inside the room. Noah is visibly hesitant about this peculiar weapon, but Albert pushes him to hold it. Since it is a gift from the crown prince, the young boy cannot simply refuse, so he gathers courage and holds the sword. Albert tells him that its name is Leviathan, the most powerful water magic sword in the empire. Around 120 people died trying to tame this relic. Noah becomes slightly desperate upon hearing something so terrible, but his brother reassures him by explaining that if the boy were going to die, he would have died the moment he touched the weapon. Speaking of which, unlike the servant who struggled to carry the box, Noah has an SS rank water attribute, which gives him the power necessary to withstand Leviathan's surreal weight. Noah feels tested on a nearly sadistic level, since his brother knew he could have died when touching the sword. This fills him with anger, but knowing he could harm himself if he said anything, he decides to stay quiet. When leaving the room, Henry asks if it was right to leave such a valuable item with the boy, but Albert sees no problem, because it is better for it to be with someone who has talent worthy of the weapon. Speaking of which, being so capable, Noah should also experience what it feels like to have his hand bitten by his own dog. That night, Noah asked Zoe, one of his maids, why she seemed so down. Despite her reluctance to speak, her master insisted enough to make her open up. the 18-year-old maid finally confesses that she is thinking of taking time off because a flood recently hit her hometown and destroyed her family's crops, and even her single mother lost her job. Zoe's relatives told her to work in the brothel and serve the imperial prince to help her family. Hearing this, Noah interrupts her and offers a job to the girl's mother in the mansion, with a salary of 10 lians a month. In this case, her only task would be to keep the back door locked. Zoe admits she has never seen such an easy job, especially with a salary above that of most people. Then Noah, without dwelling on the topic, also gives the maid and her mother an empty house in the western area of the city. Crying, Zoe kneels down and thanks him. While the young noble thinks that his title as the 13th prince would be stained if this girl, who has taken care of him since he was little, continued working in a brothel, announcing that she will be his maid for the rest of her life. The noble summons Dylan, his butler, and tells him about the flood in Daso, Zoe's hometown. Having said that, he orders his subordinate to buy as much land as he can in that city, leaving both employees not understanding anything. Noah then explains that, just like Zoe's family home, some ill-intentioned people will try to extort goods from families who are struggling. So Dylan must save these residents before it's too late. Admitting his surprise, the butler says he had never seen a noble of this age make such a brilliant decision. In reality, Noah obviously cannot say this, but before reincarnating in his former life, he was tired of seeing situations like this. Dylan then asks where the funds will come from, since this would be a high investment of approximately 700,000 lians, and Zoe almost faints upon hearing such a high amount. Noah understands why she is shocked, since the annual income of an adult man in the imperial capital is only 120 lians, and even the prince's own salary is 8,000 lians per year. Besides that, it is important to mention the tax revenue from Almeria which, added to the congratulatory money from the emperor, makes the house of the 13th imperial prince have only around 500,000 lians available. So, in this case, they are missing 200,000 to make the necessary investment in Daso. With that in mind, the noble decrees the sale of the land south of the imperial capital. Frightened, Dylan reminds him that those lands were a gift from his imperial majesty, and that selling them without permission would be considered an affront. Even so, Noah decides to tank the punishment he'll receive from his father and pushes the project forward. Because, according to him, nobles have obligations that sometimes demand sacrifices, and the priority must always be the happiness of the people. According to the young man, this kind of self-control is also a privilege of the nobility. With the decision made, Dylan ends up thanking his lord, and Noah realizes why. The butler is also from Daso, the region that suffered from the flood. The next day, one of Noah's maids was in the courtyard organizing which box would go in which wagon. Observing the employee's work, Noah is called by Henry, who wants to know where his brother is going. The boy explains his plan to buy land in Daso to help the population that fell victim to the flood. Then, seeing the water magic sword in one of the carriages in the convoy, the fourth prince asks if the boy is going to use it. Noah replies that he won't, because even though he can feel some kind of power, he still hasn't received any response beyond that still. He decided to take the weapon with him. By the way, Noah asks why his brother came alone, and he says that Albert said something strange, so he asked them to investigate. Apparently, Leviathan has a will of its own and only obeys someone it recognizes as its master. Instantly, Noah thinks that if he isn't accepted by the relic, he will suffer the same horrible fate as the people he saw in his vision. Speaking of which, Henry says he understands why his brother wants to take the sword, but asks him not to use it, since he might die if he does. With Leviathan in the luggage, Noah Ararat heads toward Daso, and, after the trip, comes face to face with the devastation caused by the flood that swept away much of the city. As Zoe brings her hand to her mouth in fear, the 13th prince asks Dylan to go to the government office, since many houses were carried away by the catastrophe along with their property titles. Therefore, the option is to buy according to the government office's list. Dylan and Zoe are impressed by another brilliant insight from their master, while Noah takes responsibility for anything that may go wrong. After the butler leaves, the noble asks Zoe to show him the region, and as they walk through Daso's destroyed alleyways, the boy notices that the tubers are also starting to rot, which is yet another sign of the complete destruction suffered by the territory. Even when Zoe recommends that her master not dedicate himself so much to this matter, he insists he will return to Daso alone if the maid does not want to accompany him. And speaking of missions, they see that the Empire seems to be doing its part in the region. because in the middle of the city, a community soup line has been set up to feed the hungry population that is homeless and unemployed. However, tasting the food himself, Noah sees that the soup is basically pure water, so poor that it is almost rotten, with a terrible taste that makes that clear. Even so, an old man interrupts the noble to say that no one should complain, considering that at least they still have something to eat. Noah tries to explain that the issue is that the empire would not serve food like this. But the conversation is interrupted by the arrival of a group of men announcing an inspection. According to Zoe, the one responsible is Gallo, a local employee who pinches his nose in disgust as he gets close to the soup. Smiling despite the terrible quality of the rations, one of the inspectors assures that, despite everything, Gallo's share will be delivered to his mansion. Hearing that, Noah approaches and bluntly asks if he is witnessing embezzlement, which makes Gallo laugh at the boldness of this kid. He argues that the region is going through serious difficulties and adds that people who are able to provide help need to be decisively rewarded, which is basically him justifying getting rich in the middle of a tragedy while the people eat water soup. Without backing down, Noah points out the man's crime of enriching himself at the expense of others' suffering. And, enraged, Galil makes it clear that this is also an affront to Lord Rowan, ruler of these lands. With the image of Leviathan in his mind, Noah immediately sentences the inspector to death, and the magic sword flies toward the noble, placing itself at his side as if agreeing with the criminal's punishment. As he unleashes a torrent of water around the boy, Noah feels the relic's power taking hold of him. Just as he takes hold of that extraordinary energy, it's a painful act that causes the human genuine suffering. Yet he had both the talent and the determination to wield that equipment. With the sword in his hand, he orders Leviathan to use its power for the people, as should be done by all those who possess the privilege of strength, the true meaning of nobility. In response, Galil attacks with his sword, but Noah quickly beheads him. The inspector's death triggers a violent reaction from his guards, but before they can strike, Leviathan reacts on its own and creates a crater so massive in the ground that one couldn't even see the bottom. Hearing the commotion, the captain of the knights who govern Dasso arrives at the site of the impact and is stunned when he sees the enormous hole. One of the inspector's subordinates accuses the child of killing Gallo, and when he realizes who that child is, Lord Rowan Green runs toward Noah and kneels to show respect to the 13th prince of the Mills Empire. He explains that he belongs to Henry's family, Noah's brother, and that he had been given the task of maintaining public order in the region. Immediately, Rowan announces to everyone present that they stand before the prince, and the subjects kneel in respect. Noah, in turn, reports the embezzlement carried out by the official in charge of inspections in Dasso, justifies Galil's punishment, and even points out the criminal's accomplices, demanding that Rowan punish them as he deems necessary. Lastly, the noble orders the community soup to be remade with royal-level quality, a decision that fills the hungry townspeople with joy. Hours later, when he hears about his younger brother's actions, Albert concludes that Noah was not bitten by a rabid dog. Instead, he made the dog obey him, which means the boy is more useful than he had imagined. The next day, Noah responds to a summons from his father. When he enters the throne room, he anxiously awaits the king's punishment for having sold the lands granted to him in the south of the empire. However, to his surprise, His Majesty thanks his son for preventing the success of those who tried to take advantage of the tragedy in Dasso. The emperor understands that Noah arrived in Dasso by chance through a maid who lived there, but he also believes the boy's deeds were the will of God, especially the fact that he managed to master Leviathan, the water magic sword. Speaking of which, the ruler once again asks Cruz to test his son's power. And when that is done, Noah's status panel appears, showing his water attribute reaching SSS rank. The emperor is delighted, convinced that the boy can still help the empire greatly. In the next moment, we see several parts of the capital of the Mills Empire, the political, cultural, and economic center of the country, a place known as the most glorious and prosperous in the world today. On Reed Street, according to the eunuchs, Noah would find a musical performance taking place. Wanting to repay what the master had done for her homeland, Zoe volunteers to join him on this mission. When they enter a theater, they arrive just in time for the performance of a young girl with pink hair and a melancholic expression, singing a song about how love, at times, can turn into pain. Noah remembers that, according to what he'd been told, the artist's name is Alachi. He notices that her technique is still that of a beginner, but he enjoys what he sees, since it's clear she sings from the heart. However, suddenly, a group of men bursts into the theater, breaking everything. Their leader, a big bald man, orders Alachi to stop singing, claiming that with this income she'll never be able to pay the debt her father left behind. The singer argues that this is the only way she can manage to pay what she owes. But the man suggests that every woman has a very specific way of earning money, and we know exactly what he means. In the midst of this, Noah calmly stands up and cites an article of imperial law, stating that children should not be forced to carry their parents' debts. He also points out that pushing this debt onto the daughter and trying to force her to sell her body is a crime. The man becomes furious and threatens Noah, who responds by using Leviathan's power to subdue the brute and his companions. Realizing he would be destroyed if he fought this guy, the bald man runs off, but promises he'll be back. While the entire audience is left speechless upon realizing they are in the presence of an imperial prince, Noah says he enjoyed the girl's singing and asks what her monthly expenses are. Embarrassed, she explains that she needs to pay for her mother's medical treatment. So Noah decides to give her a monthly payment of 25 lians so she can sing peacefully whenever she wants or needs, promising to increase the amount whenever she improves. Later, the noble returns to his humble residence, where he is greeted by his humble servants cleaning his humble shoes. He asks who those men causing trouble at the theater were, and Evelyn explains that they are known for lending money illegally in the region, in other words, classic loan sharks. By the way, upon discovering who they had been dealing with, the troublemakers found the decency to bow at the prince's gate to apologize for what they had done. But Noah orders the maids to send them away. After all, criminals, especially criminals, cannot speak to an imperial prince whenever they please. Henry appears at the house entrance, praising his brother's stance, since accepting people like that so easily lowers the status of the imperial house and its princes. Noah understands that this is one reason, but there is another behind it. Still, he wants to reveal this reason to his brother inside the house, in a private conversation. So the two gather, and Noah tells him about the singer he is helping, and that he needs to act firmly with the loan sharks, so they understand Alachi is not alone. Henry asks if the vocal slap she gave him was a good one, and the short prince admits he's still dizzy. Henry didn't think a kid his age would get this far, especially considering Frank and Gary, who are around Noah's age and aren't even close. Gary, for example, is still an immature brat who never learns proper etiquette. Hearing this, Noah reflects that although they are all brothers, each one has a different mother. However, Henry and Gary, who share the same mother, must have a different type of connection. Changing the subject, Henry comments that Noah seems to have mastered the magic sword well, and the boy says that this is thanks to his brother, who taught him that Leviathan has a will of its own. Even so, the older brother wants to know how the kid carries that huge thing around, since it's far too big for him. Noah then summons the sword in front of his brother and explains that he hides it in his sleeve in miniature form, a trick the sword itself taught him. Impressed, Henry remarks that this is unprecedented, since Leviathan was kept isolated for 200 years as a national treasure, and there are no records mentioning anything like this in the past. It is an incredible achievement for Noah. When night falls and the two princes finally appear at the gate, the loan sharks are still there, bowing. Eventually, after waiting so long, the big guy loses his patience and demands not to be ignored by the arrogant brat. His companions try to stop him from speaking like that, but it was too late. The damage was done. With just a slight movement, Noah somehow affects the man, making him choke and quickly become obedient. Henry asks what on earth his brother did, and Noah explains that he simply released a bit of Leviathan's power as a form of domination. In the end, Henry compliments the control the boy demonstrates over the magic sword. A few hours later, answering an invitation, Noah rides by carriage to a location where he is greeted by a man named Radok, who leads the prince into a huge hall full of impeccably dressed people applauding the appearance of one of the king's most beloved and respected sons. Radok is curious about the weapon the boy carries, and Noah explains that it is Leviathan, a magic sword given to him by the crown prince. This information leaves everyone stunned, since it is a national treasure personally granted by Albert Ararat. Knowing that the 13th prince's domain is Almiri, the crowd connects this territory with the sword Noah carries. In the middle of all the chatter, however, there is a brief moment of silence in which, just like in an episode of El Chavo, only one guy happens to be talking, and he's ironically mocking the prince's sword, saying it looks like one of those toy swords that light up when you press a button and are sold in department stores. Noah looks straight at the man, who pretends it wasn't him, but Leviathan knew well who it was. Without delay, the sword releases a dark miasma that starts suffocating and driving the people in the hall insane. Noah demands that the weapon stop doing that and points out that loyalty is good, but this was an exaggeration after all. It was clear the sword got angry after hearing its master being disrespected. Despite the tense moment, Reborn applauds the Imperial Prince and highlights the vast power of national treasures, since it became obvious that everyone there had the privilege of feeling the same sensation of death through His Highness's overwhelming power. Immediately, the guests begin applauding Noah Ararat as if he hadn't nearly killed everyone, while Reborn asks the prince what should be done with the laid-back guy who spoke badly about Leviathan. Noah replies that they should just ignore him because what comes from below doesn't reach you. Then, some guests are brought forward to meet His Highness, one of them being a famous merchant known as Lance Allison. However, the ones who catch the prince's attention the most are the two people who appear next. A man who introduces himself as Byron Allen, administrator of the Allen Mercantile Company. Beside him, not very comfortable with these situations, a girl introduces herself as Cindy Allen. Right away, Noah asks if she is adopted, because Byron seems to be someone from the second or third generation and carries the mannerisms of the upper class, unlike the girl. Besides that, he also noticed that Cindy had been a slave in the past, since from the moment she arrived her gaze has been one of intense observation, the eyes of someone who had once been enslaved. Impressed, Allen confirms the prince's suspicions and admits that he bought Cindy, but that she is smart and learns things quickly. However, contrary to what the merchant expected, the prince admires and encourages this kind of thing, even inviting the man to visit his mansion someday to talk more about the child. Upon hearing this, the people around them react as if Byron had won the lottery, and all the attention and envy in the hall shift toward the merchant and his daughter as he withdraws from His Highness's presence. When he leaves, Noah comments to Reborn that there is another reason he knew she wasn't his real daughter. Whenever the prince reaches for his sword, the girl immediately turns toward it with full focus, which proves Cindy has been protecting Allen since the first threat. Later, after the event, Noah Ararat goes to the marketplace and happens to run into one of his brothers, Oscar. Seeing that Noah is free, Oscar invites him to look for some treasures, since they are on Cobalt Street, a place where various antiques from all over the Empire gather, some of which can have great value. Of course, many forgeries are placed among the original pieces, so one needs to be careful in order to conduct a true treasure hunt without walking out of there with a cheap knockoff. Sometime later, after a long search, Oscar ends up giving up on finding anything worthwhile. Noah, on the other hand, finds a book he finds interesting and, for the symbolic price of 3 lions, manages to get the item for himself. Oscar asks whether that is the treasure they were looking for, but Noah was just curious about it. That said, his brother takes a more serious look at the book and realizes that this is definitely a spell grimoire by the legendary mage Andrea, which is probably worth around 1,000 lions. Oscar asks how Noah knew that, but the truth is he had no idea. He only knew that his wind magic increased when he touched the item. On that note, noticing his sword trembling in the sheath, Noah draws Leviathan and points the blade at the grimoire, since the only ones capable of increasing his abilities are those that possess a will of their own, which seems to be the case with this book. As expected, the book opens and releases what Oscar believes to be the vengeful spirit of the mage who mastered wind magic. As if it were a shadowy entity, that ghostly manifestation seems dangerous enough to make anyone run away in fear, anyone except Noah Ararat, who, wielding his magic sword, uses its water power to expel the spirit with relative ease. Worried and still unable to fully believe what he saw, Oscar asks about the potential damage to the city from the magic his brother used, but Noah explains that he fired upward, avoiding any such problem, which impresses Oscar even more due to how quick and correct that decision was. In the midst of this, the owner of an antique shop named Alan Bardsley bows before the princes, and, after seeing what Noah is capable of with magical items, tells him he has a special treasure he needs to show the young noble. Thus, Noah and Oscar go to the merchant's shop, where he displays a ring that, according to him, will only reveal its true power when the rightful owner appears. He has already shown this relic to many different people, but nothing special has ever happened. Faced with this, Noah wonders if the thing might be fake or simply useless. But of course Bardsley has considered that, and even tried throwing it away, yet it always returned to the shop as if nothing had happened, which made him believe there really is something unusual about it. Since he sees his brother as someone who has a certain affinity with untamable magical items, Oscar asks Noah to put the ring on, which he does. When he does, the ring emits a glow and, with a voice only the bearer can hear, announces that its rarity level is SSS and recognizes Noah as its true owner. With that, a gray mass begins spreading around the boy's body, forming an armor that doesn't increase any of his stats, but seems to be a different kind of entity from the others, with many possible uses. Satisfied with this, Noah says he will send payment for the item to Alan. But Oscar insists on paying and giving the ring as a gift, since he has increasingly seen that there is something different inside his brother that needs to be encouraged. After that meeting at Alan's shop, Oscar gives his brother a ride back home, and the moment the boy steps out of the carriage, he's attacked by the big, bald loan shark who had only been waiting for the right moment to settle the score. Noah reacts immediately, using the power of his ring to conjure a shield made from the strange material the item produces, blocking the sword strike thrown by the attacker. Right after that, one of Noah's servants takes advantage of the moment to knock the loan shark down and subdue him. Oscar asks how his brother managed to do that, and Noah explains that he connected the ring to Leviathan, which seems to have acted as an automatic defense in response to the hostility. Hearing this, as always, Oscar is once again impressed by how the boy managed to master that item in such a short amount of time. Sometime later, Noah Ararat returns to the theater where he first found Asahi. Since he dealt with the lone shark, he believes the singer will finally have the peace she deserves, convinced that the man won't bother her again. However, that's far from the truth. Two drunkards who were drinking themselves senseless in the place had the nerve to climb onto the stage and start fighting over the girl, acting as if she were a waitress obligated to serve them more drinks, while clearly being interested in something more than that. Just as the two are about to throw a punch, Noah places his magical shield between them and ends up breaking at least one bone in each of their hands when they strike the barrier. Then, with his sword, he slices their clothes apart and forces them to flee the theater in their underwear. Seeing that the clientele of this establishment isn't exactly well-mannered, Noah demands that the owner stop unbearable drunks like those from coming in, but the man laments that, unfortunately, that kind of drunk is literally the entire audience that keeps the place running. Since that's the case, the prince decides to buy the whole dump for 1,000 lians, an amount so high it leaves the guy emotional. Asahi, in turn, thanks him for everything the noble has been doing for her and asks if she can somehow repay all this kindness. Noah then reminds her that the only thing he expects is for her to sing working hard so that one day even the emperor himself might want to hear her voice. And so, the promising young girl begins a song that moves the audience. Check out these videos appearing on your screen and subscribe so you don't miss the next part.